Good morning, everyone, and I suppose good afternoon to our European attendees that I noticed on the sign-up list. Welcome to episode 2 of our webinar series, Practical Ideas for Crazy Times. We know that you're very busy these days, and we certainly appreciate you spending an hour with us. My name is Scott McIntosh, based here in my home office in New Brunswick, Canada, and I will be the host for today's episode. Today's episode is called Dollars Saved is Many Dollars Earned, and it will focus on approaches you can look at right now to manage your external spend in these crazy times. I know a number of you are looking for approaches that you can use to right-size the expense side of your ledger while minimizing any impacts on your team. So we're very fortunate to have with us today Natasha Shiven. Natasha is a global leader in the area of cost optimization and certainly has an information-filled presentation to provide to you all. So let me introduce Natasha. Natasha is the CEO and Managing Director at Pinwheel. She's a publicly recognized leader, executive advisor in next generation business strategy, cost transformation, program governance, communications, and change management. Natasha began her career about 20 years ago in manufacturing in a global packaging company. So she has firsthand experience with plant operations and direct strategic sourcing. This was based in Europe. Then she spent about 5 years in the packaging industry for a global chemical company and was responsible for sourcing the indirect purchase for EMEA. Then Natasha moved into consulting, first as a vice president with A.T. Kearney and then a partner at Deloitte. And that's how Natasha and I know each other. We worked together in the Deloitte partnership for a number of years. And at this point, Natasha is a recognized leader in advanced analytics for sourcing and large complex cost transformations. She's led cost takeout projects in various industries across the world, and she's helped clients save billions of dollars with double-digit approaches for just reducing costs. So, Natasha, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Scott. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, certainly crazy times, and we're fortunate to have you here with us this morning with all that's going on with COVID. So, what are you seeing around you in the marketplace, Natasha?
Thanks. Yeah, it's somewhat unprecedented. I think we can all agree to that. I quite frankly, I see a couple of things happening. I see a lot of companies, mostly on the smaller business side and the mid-side businesses, being kind of shell-shocked, right, and almost paralyzed into inaction because of all of these, ridiculous kind of constraints that are being put on them, all at once. And that's kind of what this webinar today focuses on, right? To give these companies some control and the feeling of control that they're not powerless and they can actually affect change in a fairly rapid way. And then I see a couple of companies that are typically bigger, right, and on the leading side of procurement and cost optimization that are kind of implementing the mitigation strategies that they already had in place. Because it's not, I guess, it's nothing new, right? That there's pressure on cost. It's just right now it's happening in a very rapid, accumulated way because of COVID-19. But many companies have been focusing on sustainable cost reduction using, for instance, digital analytics for a fair bit now. So I see those folks being somewhat more comfortable in dealing with this situation. But to be honest, most I think big companies and smaller companies are just kind of with their hands in their hair right now, figuring out, what am I going to do, and how am I going to, once this thing blows over, how am I going to recover from this, right? So that's kind of two ends of the spectrum that I see happening.
Yeah, definitely unprecedented. So, okay, shall we jump in?
Yeah, that sounds good. So I am going to find my little laser pointer thing. Bear with me. See if this is actually working. Yes. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen here. So what I wanted to do real quick is just kind of level set everybody, right? I don't think there's a lot of level setting needed, quite frankly, because we're all right in the middle of this. But what you can see is that right now this COVID-19 outbreak, right, is triggering and has triggered the implementation of a set of very necessary but unparalleled government measures, right? Mainly geared to keep Canadians safe. And if you look at this slide, it's very cluttered, and actually that's, quite frankly, that's the point, because you can see a fair bit of knee-jerk reaction taking place, right? Because the government, as our businesses are dealing with this for the first time, right? So the cluttered bit here is quite frankly actually demonstrative, or it shows the fact that we're dealing with this for the first time, right? But if we pick on this for a bit, if I pick out a couple of these things, you see that back in January there was the first case, right, confirmed in Canada. The government was still very much in informative mode, right, and getting some of the Canadians back from other territories back into Canada. But you see that in February it was still a little bit of a waiting mode, probably preparatory mode, right, as it became apparent that this was not gonna blow over real quick here. If you look at March, though, you can see this cluster of effects being put in place, right? And that's really relevant mostly for today's discussion, because there have been, unparalleled measures like provincial governments ordering the closures of schools, not essential places, an $82 billion relief fund, right, being made available, border closures, right, to all non-Canadians, and the Canadian and U.S. Border closures. So those are some measures that had to be taken, right, but are very, very disruptive, obviously, to the economy. So if we go to this slide, I think we can all agree, right, that over-vectoring on public safety is absolutely paramount, right? It's the key. It's the key end of the spectrum that we kind of want to swing the pendulum to, making sure that Canadians are safe, right? And so I think the government is doing an exceptional job. The unfortunate side effect of it, of course, is that it exacerbates what this virus is already doing, right? So the detrimental effects that it started having on business are obviously exacerbated by some of the government measures, right? So if we take a look at how this slide attempts to kind of, quite frankly, really bluntly put this out there, right? You can see that revenue trends, right, of industry are severely hit, right? So it's hospitality, airlines, luxury retail, for instance. You can see that this mirrors the timeline that I just showed you, right? You can see that as this started growing, you could see revenues kind of organically drop, just because people were going out less, they were spending less. But then there's this inflection point right around the time when these measures start being put in place, where, quite frankly, non-essential businesses have to close, right? And gatherings of people, first over 100, then over 50, then over 5, are being restricted. Public spaces are being closed. You can see what that does specifically, obviously, to brick and mortar retail, for instance, right? But again, also to hospitality. It's a nosedive, right? Because some companies are just ceasing operations, and ceasing operations means pretty much no revenue coming in, other than obviously what you've got from if you have an omni-channel approach and you've got some level of e-commerce in place, you're going to get some revenue from that direction, but it's a fairly significant nosedive, a really significant drop there. So the other side of the spectrum, unfortunately, is that the costs, at minimum stay the same or even increase a little bit. Again, this is indexed, right? So you can compare one to the other. You can see that they go up a little bit, typically because of implementation of mitigating actions, right? I'm trying to get ahead of this. You can see that at minimum they stay stable because, everybody's on the hook for the fixed costs, right? You have to pay the rent, the insurances, taxes, your SG&A. That those are costs that you need to pay off. Then again, there's an inflection point that gets hit around the 13th of March there, where measures are starting to be put in place, where, folks just, the bar is being met, right? And so folks can no longer sustain it. You see temporary layoffs happening. You see where you can variable cost being reduced, right? So raw material is being purchased less. And then again, you see that significant drop happening as the cash on hand has quite frankly been depleted. And it's forcing mass layoffs, right? And creditor payment deferrals. So the point really of this is being hit, this stays the same, right? Or stays a lot higher than the revenue that's coming in. And the way to show that is to really look at overlaying those two charts. So if we overlay them, you can see the problem here has become very apparent, where unfortunately the green bars are going down a fair bit, and the red bars are staying high, right? So there's a pressure that's getting built up within a lot of industries where you need to be extremely cash rich, right, to be able to overcome this. So logically, what this means is there's two options, right? You either try to bring your revenue back up over the red bar, or you try to bring your costs down below the green bar. So bringing up revenue quickly, though, is a challenging climb, right? In this particular COVID crisis, because it almost means you have to diversify or transform quickly to adapt to this new normal. And unless you're like a distillery who can transform, it's still costly though, but you can transform into producing hand sanitizer, or you actually have apparel manufacturing where you can start making face masks and making PPE. It's really hard for most businesses to do that, right? They're not set up that way. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the knowledge to adapt to this new normal. So the other end of the spectrum is bringing that cost down, which is a more realistic exercise. And so that's what we'll focus on for the rest of this deck. But the key point there is that there are many factors that are actually under our direct control that, if we spend some time on it, can produce rapid results and are relatively, again, not super easy, but are relatively easy to implement. And what I've seen is that people need focus, right? A lot of folks, as I discussed in the beginning, are shell shocked. They're like, I don't know what to do. They're with their hands in their hair. Where do I start? So providing that focus and saying, listen, forget about the revenue piece for a bit. Let's focus on the accelerated takeout of cost where you can. I've seen that kind of give people a glimmer of hope at this point, and giving them control, right? So there's actions that we can take now before I have to lay off my personnel. So it's giving people a sense of wow, I'm not completely powerless here. So let's take a deeper look at the typical cost types businesses have, right? I'm not going to go too in depth on this slide, but these are probably cost types that every single one of us has seen, right? But if you look at doing a simple exercise and you look at how easy can I reduce these different types and what impact could that have, there's a couple of kind of suspects that start bubbling up fairly quickly. So if we define reduction potential and highest reduction potential, in this case, those are cost types that are relatively easy to reduce, right? So they're easy or medium in this column and have a relatively high impact. So medium or high in this column. Those are the ones that you can change in fairly quickly. So again, those are typically these four that then kind of come bubbling up, right? And what you can notice, look at these four bars in green, is that those are all related to external expenditure. So what I've been trying to do for the past couple of minutes is kind of hone down, right? Let's zero in on a couple of tangible buckets that we can start digging into, and a couple of tangible buckets that we can start reducing quickly. And what you see is that those are very much related to procurement, right? External expenditure. So the next couple of slides are really going to dig a little deeper into procurement and external expenditure and how you can really affect change quickly. And so what this slide says is also something that most people don't really know, is that 30 to 50% of a company revenue is typically external spend, right? So a large part, the largest part of COGS, that's what McKinsey says here too, is typically procurement related. So cost of goods sold, 30 to 50% of revenue is procurement and external expenditure related. So that makes, and I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I'll bring everybody back. But that, for instance, makes procurement a prime suspect in pre and post merger synergy. And you're wondering, why is she talking about pre and post merger synergy? I'm talking about this because in an M&A environment, the thing that everybody is going after, right, is reducing costs quickly. And usually they're going after that, so getting synergies quickly, because of, if you really think about it, self-inflicted pressure, right? Someone communicated a goal, an objective to Wall Street, and now all of a sudden everybody's on the hook for making that target, hitting that target. And so what we can do really is we can use those levers that they use in an M&A environment and boost them, right, and leverage them to really work for a case of a true emergency like we have at the moment. So
Natasha,
yeah,
just maybe a comment and then a question. I found that really interesting when you explained that to me first. So does that mean that, while COVID is unprecedented, needing to remove costs quickly isn't? Is that sort of the point?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point. It's people have put themselves over centuries, probably have put themselves into spaces of self-inflicted pressure, right, where they're in a pickle and they need to take costs out quickly. The only difference is that now it's being it's being inflicted from an external force, right? So it's the synergy levers, types of levers are there. Um, and they take out costs relatively quickly. And what I'm saying is, let's take those and boost them, see how we can even further accelerate those to actually take costs out in weeks to provide some much needed relief, right? That's what we're really looking to do here in the next of these couple of slides. So what's commonly agreed upon is that these synergy levers, they can provide significant relief, typically within months. And in this case, if we boost them, my experience is they can even do it within weeks. They are also relatively small when it comes to disruption, right? You're not laying off people. You're not making structural changes to your company. You are deferring that, if you will, to your supply base a little bit. But so it's relatively easy to recover from. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and juicy opportunities within procurement that in M&A type situations all of a sudden become apparent. But that also now, if we take a look at it in detail, and in the next couple of slides, I'll show you how we can do that, become very apparent. They start bubbling to the top, and they start to form tangible actions that we can take immediately, right? So let's dive a little deeper into this, right? So how can we actually identify specific categories that are within a procurement environment susceptible to take cost out in an accelerated way? So, and if you're not a procurement professional, you may not have seen this, but in procurement, typically people use something called a spend tree to define, okay, these are the spend categories, all the categories of external expenditure that we are going to tackle, typically in a strategic way. So we're doing negotiations, RFPs, and affecting change from a strategic sourcing perspective. So if we take that and we take a quick look at it, there's direct categories that are in there, and there's indirect categories. So directs are typically related to commodities, chemicals, ingredients, packaging, and logistics. And then indirects are typically more the service-like categories that a company has spend in, has typically significant spend in too, that arguably usually are easier to affect change. And so if we take this tree exhaustively, right, we look at all these categories, we pull them into a simple Excel exercise, and we do that same ease of reduction impact exercise, we can, quite frankly, come up fairly quickly with those that have the highest reduction potential, and that are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we can tackle now, right? So to make it easier, what we can do is use a bubble chart as a simple tool, plot those spend categories on there. So using the axis of reduction impact that we just showed, and ease of reduction, right? So easy to impact, hard to impact. Plot those categories on there, and then we see within this green bubble, suspects bubble up that we can actually tackle now. And a lot of companies have already done that, right? They've ceased travel, they've cut temp labor or contractors. So these are the typical ones that get cut quickly and basically just get cut completely. But there are other bubbles in here that are a little, that people don't want to touch as quickly. And what I will show in the next couple of slides is you can affect relatively quick cost reduction change in these categories as well. So obviously this is an example chart, right? So each business's bubble chart or plan of attack, right, when you do this exercise, will of course look different. It depends on a whole bunch of factors that influence ease of reduction on this axis. And of course, the reduction impact, right, depends on the spend you have in those categories. But popping open an Excel document and doing just the simple two-step exercise that I just described will allow you to plot yours, right? Will allow you to plot your relatively quickly. And of course, if there are questions related to this, we're very happy to help. And honestly, I've been helping a lot of people out for free with this, because it's a relatively simple exercise, and I have the time. So, you have a question, Scott?
Yeah, just curious, like what are some, I think you alluded to, but what are some common, like unanticipated areas that, that people find in that, like I'm looking at that packaging bubble, like is that sort of an unexpected one for a lot of folks, or just curious of some more examples, I suppose.
And I'm losing the quality a little bit here on my end, so hopefully you guys can still hear me. But am I still okay? Am I still audible?
Yeah, you cut out for a few seconds, but the quality's quite good now.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm in a bit of a rural area here. So it's a good question, because a lot of times people are quick. Slide will elaborate on that a little bit more as well, but they're quick to just cut travel, right? Kick out the consultants, IT consultants, and do those quick demand management levers, and take a fair amount of cost out that way. What is typically what people are less comfortable touching is areas like the directs, right? So that directly affect their product or their service, like freight, warehousing, commodities, because there's typically a lot of supplier relationships in there that have been strategic for a long time. It is more complicated. There are complex SKUs in those particular categories. There are complex service level agreements that exist there. So you can see that the ease of reduction, because of that, those particular aspects, becomes harder. But what I'm proposing is, don't just, kick those off the table. Take a look at them, but take a look at them in a sustainable, rigorous way, right? And so what I'll show here
Thank you.
is, yeah, for sure. What I'll show here is that now that we have in that bubble, right, we got our 4, 5, maybe even 10 categories identified. So how we actually go and tackle reducing costs within those bubbles is it determines the speed of it coming bottom line, of dollars coming bottom line, and it determines the size of the opportunity. So this simple table here shows you from a complexity perspective, again, so how hard is it to act these strategies? And then from a potential reduction, again, how much potential of cost reduction do you get out of it? What some tangible actions are that you can take? So if I just flip back real quick, you saw all these bubbles kind of lined up here. Those are the ones where they're super easy. You're going to cut, like POS promotion. I mean, if your stores are closed, why would you go ahead and keep promoting certain brands and certain products? It's, these are no-brainers, right? The ones that you cut by basically just stopping demand in those categories. So you're looking at things like contract labor elimination, marketing spend suspension, also looking at building maintenance, for instance, and reducing that. So it doesn't mean stop maintaining your buildings, but you can tone it, you can really tone it down to just the critical maintenance aspects. And non-critical facilities, for instance, These are the typical ones that kind of get hit first, and also construction or CapEx suspension. The point with that, though, is that hits CapEx, right? And it doesn't necessarily hit OpEx, which means that you don't get the cost out as quickly. But these are the usual suspects that bubble up real quick to say, okay, let's just cut those, right? Or suspend those. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about these. If we go down the list here, though, you can see that there are 4 more strategies with a bunch of levers in them. And there's, this is not exhaustive. This is just an example set that you can pull that will get you more value. So the obvious one, right, is to talk to your supply base and fast track supplier engagement. Now, a couple of ways to do that within procurement. Everybody knows the typical, couple of months negotiations, couple of months strategic sourcing cycle where you leverage an RFP or an RFX, you do an e-auction here and there. So what we're talking about here is, let's take that and compress that timeline, right, to get results within weeks with your suppliers, or maybe within a month and a half. So picking on a couple, quick win orchestrated negotiations is one of those, where typically anybody who's in the procurement profession knows that negotiations are typically tedious, take a couple months. There's a bunch of back and forth that happens as you kind of hone into the win-win situation for both parties. In this case, it becomes a bit more aggressive, right? And the success of this is also very much dependent on the degree of assessiveness and decisiveness, quite frankly, that a business is willing to take right now and in leveraging its full bargaining power. So quick win negotiations in this case is, there's a framing meeting, there's a negotiation meeting, and many times what you do is you leverage, because the reason why many negotiations take a long time is there's emotion, right? There's a lot of emotion in negotiating, and that kind of drags things out. So leveraging facts, and for instance, I've seen facts where we do index price recovery, where you're looking at commodities and indices dropping right now in foresight. So with your supplier, you've seen oil-based, for instance, oil-based petrochemical derivatives drop significantly. You should get that pass through, right? So you negotiate quickly to get that pass through. Another part there is really leveraging should cost and benchmarks. And this is, I know this sounds tedious, but a person, if someone is savvy in Excel and with a financial background, can do this in hours. It can seriously can write out a should cost in hours, and we can do benchmarking within hours, right? So the key is leverage those facts with your suppliers and really drive a fast negotiation cycle. On the more collaborative side, you see people doing accelerated requests for solution, and that's where you're actually asking your supply base to bid on whatever cost reducing solutions they have in place and they can come up with. And that means, I'm sorry, I have some noise in the background working from home. That means, for instance, coming up with new, quickly implementable specifications. How can we quickly take service level elements out of our services to reduce cost? And that kind of intertwines with this third layer here, is where you, again, and this comes back to decisiveness. And really, when push comes to shove, you can see, like in a crisis like this, people do become more decisive because they, quite frankly, they're left with no choice. Where you folks going to, okay, taking all our services, taking all the products that we buy, let's take all the bells and whistles out of it and go back to basic. So picking on a couple here again, I've seen folks do packaging layer elimination. Originally, we put a bottle in a carton in a bag, and then a bag in a corrugate box. Gee, I mean, in the first place, you would think, why have we been doing that for years in the first place? Um, it's something like that apparently is needed to kind of also highlight and scrutinize some of the silly things that businesses have been doing. So, gee, just taking a couple of layers out of the packaging, right? It basically saves you 20 to 30% cost. Going all the way down to the basics, keeping the lights on for IT help desk services, none of the bells and whistles. So white glove, no more white glove freight services. That's kind of the key here, right? So rapidly, through workshopping, typically through cross-functional workshopping, saying, okay, let's make decisions here. Let's act. What can we reduce without, hurting quality or service or assurance of supply? But what can we logically reduce here quickly? And then the fourth, sorry, and the fifth one, I'm going to speak to a little bit more quickly. So the key elements here is mainly related to, for instance, warehousing and freight, right? There are certain pricing models that you can quickly switch to with logistics providers that take process steps out of the equation. So it could be something like leveraging more cross-docking, right? It could be something like no kitting. And several 3PL providers provide that option. And sometimes I see clients even know that they have it. So a lot of this also relates to making current the services and the specs that you currently buy, and kind of making a judgment call on whether you really need it. A lot of people are buying, to put it in a kind of an automotive analogy, they're buying Ferraris when, quite frankly, all they need to do the trick is a Volkswagen, right? So those are the first four elements of strategies that we can use. That, again, this is probably around what I've seen, the 3 to 6 week spectrum, dependent again on decisiveness and aggressiveness of a company. These up top here can take cost out within weeks. I've seen it being able to take cost out within 1 to 2 weeks. The last one here, I'll just point out one thing, is as this COVID-19 crisis is hurting a lot of people across supply chains, I've also seen folks get together, typically top to top meetings across the supply chains, saying, okay, where do we share the burden? I'm relatively cash rich still. I take on the burden for these next weeks. And then there's a negotiation, or there is quite frankly, a task forcing where those parties together come up with, okay, how do I then repay you down the line? And really also looking for the first time into, again, what constraints do we have in place that are silly, and how can we cut those out? Again, I'm speaking a fair bit about this. If there are any questions related to this, feel free to ping me after the webinar. There are many more additional to this, but these are some of the usual suspects that we see that have really helped companies, quite frankly, in the past couple of weeks that I've been working with, but also during, for instance, the 2008 crisis, take costs out quickly that they hadn't even realized that they were doing things that were, for instance, silly, and quite frankly, they stopped doing that.
So should you typically do sort of a brainstorming, to identify the focus areas in any given company, or I think you'd mentioned workshops. There must be quite a bit of dialogue going into making the choices on where the top few focus areas, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. There's more dialogue the more you kind of go down, right? So when there's discussions into changing specifications of a product, or of services, eliminating process steps, and quite frankly, working across the value chain. That's workshopping, right? And what I've seen is typically those type of levers have been pulled for decades. The difference is these are typically facilitated by third parties and very rigorously designed to kind of enforce commitments from all the parties involved at the end of each day, right? So definitely when you kind of go down from 3 to 5, you need cross-functional collaboration. You need decision makers at the table to make sure you can actually get an impact and a commitment quickly. When you're looking at these top ones, this is typically just a decision that procurement, for instance, can make, right, or operations can make. And the same with supplier engagement. So it depends on how disruptive you get. The more as we're going down, the more disruptive it can potentially get. You need more workshopping. Typically you need kind of an external party to help drive resolution there.
You must need open-mindedness as well, right? From creativity.
Yes, but you'd be surprised how open-minded people get right now. They're basically just give me anything, right? So it's I sometimes say it's unfortunate that it takes this to get people to be decisive and to get people to be more aggressive and really stop doing things that were sometimes kind of silly in the first place.
Oh, good. So interesting. Okay, thank you.
So I think we have a couple of minutes left. So this is, again, I know it's a whole smorgasbord of bullets and be happy to talk through them, offline, a bit more as people wish. The key bits that I do want to focus on in the last couple of minutes that we have here are do try to not, implement knee-jerk reactions, because you can see a lot of that happening right now as well, right? As we started seeing out, folks are kind of shell-shocked and kind of started making panicky reactions. You started laying off a bunch of folks. You're trying to rapidly differentiate in whichever way you can to kind of get some money coming into the business. So where we can, though, and it's a completely normal human reaction to a situation like this, but where we can, we need to try to take it out sustainably, right? So take costs out sustainably and not in a knee-jerk manner. And the reason is, if we do that and we do it exhaustively, rigorously, we have a process in place like the one that we laid out in the past slides. You save yourselves a lot of headache once the dust settles, right? And the dust will settle on this thing at some point, hopefully, within the next couple of months. It's important because that way you avoid kind of deferring the problem to a future state. And actually, if you're making a lot of knee-jerk decisions, you can put yourself in a worse position in the end, right? You can cause a lot of complexity to be added onto your business. You can dilute your brand, right? If you're all of a sudden, people don't understand what you're about anymore. You can, on the cost side, put a lot of complexity and constraints in place, and you're actually at risk of hurting kind of your structural operating model, process, talent, and technology to a point where it's misaligned. And that is going to then give you, yes, you'll be fine for the next couple of months, but that's going to give you a whole host of new, renewed pressure in next year. So it's important to try to use a process that's rigorous, and also take a look at whatever decision you're making, right? Contrast it against what is the impact on quality assurance of supply and service, and rate it as such, right? Because otherwise, again, you're alleviating yourself right now, but you might end up with, gee, with a far bigger problem, like a year down the line or 6 months down the line. And actually, the key reason why we want to ensure that we do it sustainably is, gee, let's try to make it in such a way that we actually get ahead of the next time this type of uh, emergency happens. And it might not be a virus. We can all be left to conjecture as to what what might happen next. But the point is, as you're going through it, try to build some level of, I wouldn't say immunity, but muscle against this type of thing happening, right? So typically what you see, and a lot of companies have kind of been on this journey, it's kind of halted right now, right? As they're focusing on imminent cost reduction actions that need to happen. But we do need to try to get back on this path once the dust has settled, because procurement consultants and advisors all over the world agree that to ensure that you can handle an uncertain future, you need to build agility, right? You need to build agility into your team. You need to be able to be flexible and nimble to react appropriately and effectively to situations like this. And within procurement, that means what leading and mature companies are already doing. It means ensuring you have strategic procurement that is accepted and embedded across the company, and being central led, right? Or centrally coordinated, because that allows you to make decisions quickly, right? It vastly enhances decisiveness. Versus having to go decentrally to get approval from dozens of individuals. Having a seat at the table is also something that leaders, where you can see leaders excel at being nimble, right? Because a C-level procurement executive like a CPO can make decisions quickly, and also picking on digital and advanced analytics a little bit, even though folks might think, well, this is not the time to talk about that. Agreed, but at some point, it is important to try to get back onto the digital bandwagon, because digital technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, process automation, Internet of Things, blockchain can help accelerate decision making, can help make it more accurate, and can vastly enhance supply chain and procurement ability and nimbleness. And that's exactly the type of thing that you need, right, for the next time around. So once we're past this, I think the message for sure is focus on those first 6-7 slides of this deck, right? Let's get ahead of the imminent issue. But once we're past this, let's again try to get back on the road to leading practice. Make sure that you build muscle for the next time this happens, and that you're quicker and more agile in responding to it.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Natasha. I think that's just such good advice. And, everything comes in phases, but, everything you do, anything you do around using digital to solve this crisis will stay with you, all the way through along the way. So,
yeah. And I've seen a couple of my clients that have, and they're the bigger ones, right? They're the Fortune and Global 500 companies that have implemented an advanced analytics center of excellence, for instance, that are now benefiting from this because they have the ability to make decisions quickly. It's all digital. They're not sifting through 10 piles of paperwork to try to find data. So again, not the key concern at this moment, but what we want to do is mitigate anything like this, or mitigate the effects of anything like this hitting us as hard again, right, the next time around. So putting that kind of backbone in place when you can, I think is definitely the right way to go. Um, and I guess kind of as a last thought here, really, it seems a bit onerous and it seems a bit complex. And wow, there's all these things in this entire journey that I need to go on. And the key thing I think that I would like to leave folks with is what you should at minimum do. Let's say if you're over a revenue of 25 million or so, if you want to build stamina, right, and build some agility to handle these kinds of disruptive events, is get ahead of strategically sourcing, right? So try to get away from the tactical purchasing and buying, because this allows you to fully leverage your bargaining power, right? And it allows you to be far more decisive and agile. From a process perspective, try an integrated process in place. And that's not something you do in a month. That typically takes a year. But once you're back and once we've recovered from this, get back on the journey to try to admin a process in place. That's the category management piece is linked to procure to pay. It's fully integrated with supplier relationship management. Also from a technology perspective, that's important. And as we kind of discussed, if you can start embarking on getting some digital technologies into the mix, because those will vastly help buffer the next time around, right? So um, I guess what I'd like to leave folks with is I realize this is a lot of information, and we've thrown around a lot of strategies and levers and tools and whatnot. So if there is any urge to want to learn more about this, if there are businesses that are they're being affected at the moment, and like I said, are with their hands in their hair, not knowing what to do, I'd be more than happy to jump on a call for free and kind of help folks through this. I think if you go on to our website, you can find, if you scroll down, you can find a Calendly schedule where you can book some time. I think there's 30 minutes that one can book as well. If not, feel free to get in touch with me directly. And like I said, at this moment, I just authentically really want to help businesses from going under. Some of my paid projects are on hold, right? So I have time. I'd rather help folks out than to just sit there twiddling my thumbs. So let me just leave it at that, and not sure if there's any questions or how you want to end it, Scott.
Yeah, there are a couple, and we'll one that's interesting, and I was also thinking similar is, and maybe the way I would introduce it is, I'm thinking back to your bubble chart, like are there other criteria that need to be added to the thinking? And I think the question was around marketing, like how do you know when to identify marketing or potentially other things on there as potentially part of the solution versus part of the problem? And how have those discussions typically gone based on what you've seen?
It's very dependent. So it's very business specific. In certain companies, especially companies that are marketing driven, it's a bigger discussion, right? Because you're talking about basically cutting the marketing budget, and that's a big deal. So that's something that takes and you can see marketing agencies and advertising. You see those bubbles kind of moving to the right. In other businesses where it kind of depends on the culture of a company. If a company is very engineering driven, you can see that being, and business to business, for instance, right? You can see that being an easier cut. So the way that I would say is the best way to go about it is to stay fact-based, right? So let's look at the facts. Let's look at these two axes, and let's really just respectfully scrutinize each other's thinking too, right? I mean, for instance, pick on an apparel retailer, for instance, right now, right? Your stores are closed because you're not an essential provider. So do you really need POS promotion? Do you really need point of sale promotion in your stores right now? No, right?
Mhm.
It's not doing anybody any good. You're spending money on displays sitting there with no one to look at them, right? So it it really is on a case by case basis. Advertising the same thing. If you only have brick and mortar stores, you have no e-commerce, right? And a lot of companies, smaller to mid-sized businesses, are in the spot, right? The Lululemons and Aritzis, they all have e-commerce in place. For instance, if you look at apparel, so they get it, they get a decent amount of revenue that's being funneled through that channel right now. But if you're smaller, you don't have that. Why would you spend a bunch of advertising trying to get people to your stores when they're closed? So
Mhm.
it's it's kind of forcing folks to, and that's why typically it's a very emotional discussion, right? So typically
Yeah.
there's a third party that helps facilitate it and helps to kind of keep the peace. But
Mhm.
it's really, let's get real with each other. And do we really need marketing agencies creating all kinds of, like, creative agencies creating all kinds of commercials for us right now? Probably not, right? So, and you come to a through logic, through rigor, through fact-based kind of workshopping, you typically can come through to a decision related to what to do with each of these bubbles quickly.
Mhm. Oh, thank you. I think that makes sense. Yeah, I really like the fact based, and I know that's a theme to your work all the way through. Watch the data. Don't use assumptions. So that's so helpful. So okay, well, I think we should start to wrap, Natasha. An hour goes by so quickly. So thanks again to all of you for attending. I know that everyone is so busy and there are so many things we can all spend our time on these days. So we really do appreciate it. We will send out an email with some material for you. So there'll be a video replay and a transcript, some other things, including a link with how to contact Natasha. And I would encourage any of you that would like a thinking partner in this area to reach out to Natasha. She's a true expert in this area and really wants to help. So I would encourage any of you to take advantage of that. We will be looking for your feedback as well. There should be a survey pop up when the Zoom meeting closes. So if you could take a minute and let us know how we're doing and where we might improve, we would value it. This is session 2 of 9. So we'll certainly apply any feedback we get. Next week's session is strengthening your team during a crisis, and some leadership and people topics from Andy Biting and I. So same time, same place. Please spread the word. If there are others that you think can benefit from this, we would love to add them to the group go forward. And when you sign up, you do get access to the previous sessions, the replays, the transcripts and tools retroactively. So if someone, for instance, missed today's talk that you think could benefit from it, not to worry. We can certainly provide the replay and related things to them. So I think we end it there. Natasha, thanks to you. Thanks again to everyone on the line, and hope everyone has a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks.